Okay, so there's been a pretty major policy shift when it comes to the official language of the U.S. government. A new executive order just dropped. So what does it actually do? What's different now? And, what are its limits in the real world? We're going to unpack all of that.
So right off the bat, to kind of get a feel for the thinking behind this, let's just look at the order's own words. The stated goal here is all about promoting unity and creating a shared American culture. That phrasing is really interesting, and it kind of sets the tone for this whole policy change.
And here it is, the main event. On March 1st, 2025, an executive order was signed that officially designates English as the language of the U.S. government. Now, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? But that one sentence, it's got a lot of layers to it. So what does that really mean day to day?
Okay, so to really understand what's new here, we've got to look back at what just got replaced. You see, for a full 25 years, there was a totally different policy on the books, and it's the key to understanding why this new order is such a big deal. All right, a quick but really important sidebar here. What exactly is an executive order? It's not a law that Congress passes. Think of it more as a directive, an order from the president, on how the federal government itself should operate. And trust me, that distinction is going to be super important in just a bit.
This timeline really lays it all out. Way back in 2000, President Clinton signed an order, Executive Order 1366. And that one order, it basically set the rules for a whole quarter of a century. It was the law of the land, so to speak, for federal agencies until, well, this year, when it was revoked.
Now, that old policy, it all hinged on this one key concept, limited English proficiency, or LEP for short. It's the official term for folks who don't speak English as their primary language and, have a tough time reading, speaking, or understanding it. So what did that old order actually do? Well, here's what it boiled down to. It required, and that's the key word, it required federal agencies to give what they called meaningful access to their services for people with LEP. And this wasn't just, a nice suggestion. It was a flat-out mandate. It applied to the agencies themselves and to anyone getting federal money. All right, so that brings us to the new order. And you'll see this isn't just a simple tweak to the rules. No, it's a completely different way of thinking, a real shift in the whole philosophy of how the government should handle language. And this, right here, this is the change in a nutshell. It's the before and after. We went from a system that required meaningful access to a new one that completely revokes that requirement. All that power now shifts away from a top-down rule and lands right in the lap of individual agency bosses. It's their call now? So what's the official reasoning for such a big change? Well, here are the stated goals. And as you can see, it circles right back to what we saw at the beginning, this idea of promoting national unity, a shared culture, and framing English as a pathway to being an engaged citizen. Which, of course, brings us to the million-dollar question. What does this actually mean in the real world? Is this more of a symbolic statement, or is it going to fundamentally change how people interact with the government on a day-to-day basis? Okay, let's just get right to it. This is probably the first question on everyone's mind. Does this mean all government documents, all services, everything, is it all going to be English only from now on? And the answer, which might actually surprise you, is no. The order itself makes this crystal clear. If you read the text, it specifically says that it does not require or direct any agency to stop providing documents or services in other languages. So it's not a ban. Okay, so this is probably the most important thing to get right here. The key change isn't adding a ban, it's removing the mandate. That requirement from the federal government is gone. The decision is now up to each individual agency head to make for themselves. Right, so if the old order is gone, what happens to the whole mountain of paperwork, all the rules and guidance documents that were built up over 25 years based on that old policy? Well, the new order has an answer for that. It specifically tells the Attorney General to get rid of all the old policy guidance and then issue new guidance that lines up with this new philosophy of agency discretion. Okay, let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. Where does an executive order like this even fit in the grand scheme of U.S. law? And remember what we talked about just a minute ago? An executive order isn't a law. It's a directive for federal agencies. It can't just create a new national law out of thin air. And that is absolutely crucial for understanding what this order can and can't do. Now take a look at this number. 0. What in the world do you think that represents when we're talking about all this?
That's right. It's the number of official languages that are actually named in the U.S. Constitution. 0. The Constitution is totally silent on the matter. It never established an official language for the country.
And that fact right there is why a lot of analysts are saying this new executive order is, well, largely symbolic. Because the Constitution doesn't weigh in, and because the order itself doesn't actually ban other languages, you could argue its biggest impact is the message it sends, not the concrete rules it puts in place.
So that's where we're at. The policy has made a huge pivot from a top-down mandate to bottom-up discretion for each agency. And that leaves us with the big, unanswered question. What's that actually going to look like in practice across the entire U.S. government? What happens now?